We've covered the foundations of security, but before diving into the basic LAN, let's start this chapter with how data protection, encryption, and cryptography keeps our communications secure. Whether you're texting a friend, buying online, or just browsing, encryption is silently working in the background. At its core, encryption is the science of converting human-readable data into something unreadable and then back again. Once you understand cryptography, you can more easily grasp how computers create connections over the internet securely. And that's where something amazing called symmetric cryptography comes in. But more on that later. Next, we'll cover digital certificates and how we can trust all these systems with our information. Then, we'll be ready to dive into network architecture planning, followed by how we secure the basic LAN. Mike, take it away.
One of the things that I really enjoy quizzing new security people about is, well, what are we encrypting? Why do we use cryptography? And their answer is well, we're going to protect our stuff. And if I'm very lucky, I can get them to say, well, Mike, we're here to protect our data. And that's what I want to talk about in this episode. Number one, I want to talk about what really is data. And then secondly, I want to talk about where is data, what does data do, and how does that affect our cryptography? So let's go ahead and get started by talking about what really is data. So it's easy for us when you hear the word data to think, well, database, right? So you have a list of customers or something like that. But data goes far beyond that. If you had a stack of photographs on a hard drive someplace, that could easily be data, especially if you want to encrypt those photographs. If you have text messages, those are very much data. A phone conversation is data. The conversation I'm having between me and a web server is data. So data is everywhere, and data doesn't just sit in a database. And that's the important thing to think about when we're talking about the aspects of data. So let's think about this for a minute. Okay, Mike, so basically you're saying almost everything is data. Yes. Windows registries are data. About the only thing that I would argue that is not data in the world of IT would be the programs themselves, executable code. Pretty much everything is some form of data somewhere. So where does this data reside? Well, that's what, when we talk about aspects of data, that's what this is all about. So the first place when we're talking about data is we talk about data at rest. So when we're talking about data at rest, we're talking about data on mass storage. Invariably, that means it's sitting on a hard drive or a SSD or maybe optical media still for those who still use that type of stuff. But when we talk about data at rest, what we're saying is there is no program, there's no computer looking at, querying, moving, reading, writing, erasing, whatever that data. It's just sitting there. So data at rest is a place that we're going to have things like, for example, if you're working with Microsoft Windows or Linux, you're going to have your passwords stored somewhere on the hard drive. Now it's going to be highly encrypted or hashed or something like that, but you'll see passwords. So as a person who wants to, say, attack passwords, I'm not going to be looking for running programs. I'm going to just start looking for certain spots on mass storage to get to those passwords. The other thing, when we talk about the more classic databases, so we have a MySQL database or something like that, it could be personal information. In that case, we might be looking at a web page, and let's say it's something like eBay. So eBay has the web page itself, but there are computers behind it that store databases of not only your name and your phone number, but the stuff you've bought in the past, what your rankings are. It stores communication between you and buyers and sellers. All of this data is data at rest, sitting on a hard drive on some computer somewhere behind ebay.com. So we want to be very careful with that. Another great example would be proprietary information. Your health provider probably has a database someplace that not only has your name on it, but it's also going to have your latest blood pressure rating, your blood type, your history of illnesses. That type of stuff is all being sat in what we call data at rest. The next form of data that we run into is what we call data in use or data in computation. Now, what we're talking about in this case is that the database of your personal information or the database of the customer information, or somebody's just accessing a password that's being stored on a hard drive. When I say somebody is accessing a password, let me be careful here. You are trying to log into something, and the software at the server side is reading your login and comparing it to something on the hard drive. You get the idea? So what's happening here is you have software that is actually running and doing something to the data itself. So when we run into these types of situations, we have a whole other type of problem now. Now we're talking about data that's sitting mainly in RAM more than anything else, being accessed by the CPU. One big problem we run into with data in use or data under computation is that it's often unencrypted. In a lot of systems, what we do is we keep data at rest is sitting on a hard drive. But the moment I start accessing it, we go through a decryption process, and bad guys who know what they're doing can often grab the data while it's sitting in RAM and be able to see stuff that they shouldn't be able to see. Simple things like, for example, shoulder surfing. Somebody could be typing away happily on their computer. They're accessing some bunch of Microsoft Word files with everybody's different salaries on it, and somebody could be shoulder surfing. In that case, by shoulder surfing, I mean they simply walk behind you and they're looking, and because your data is in use, they can see everybody's pay. So that could be a problem. Other tools, for example, key loggers, which are little devices that actually keep track of all the keys being typed, are another situation where we can see where data in use can be abused. So things like shoulder surfing and key loggers are the issues that we see with data in use. The last one is data in transit. And most of the time when you hear about hackers, this is, yeah, I did the double quotation mark. I did it right there. Is data in transit. So this is where we're talking about the classic hackers. So data is moving through your local area network. Data is moving on a wireless network. Data is moving on the internet. Data is moving between you and a vendor. So in this case, you've got data going from one hopefully secure system to another hopefully secure system, and somehow in between it is intercepted. So we call this sniffing. Anytime somebody can tap into the connection between two systems and start grabbing that data, whether they can read it encrypted or unencrypted, it's sniffing. And sniffing is just something we deal with. The worst aspect to sniffing is what we call man-in-the-middle situations. So not only am I grabbing this data between two different sources, but more than that, maybe I'm trying to hack the data, maybe I'm trying to decrypt the data, and then stealing whatever I want. And then I can really be evil with man in the middle, and I can grab some data coming from one side, I can pretend to be the other guy and hand it back to them. We're going to see a lot of these man-in-the-middle type attacks. The last thing we worry about with data in transit, and this runs into a lot when we're talking about sniffing, for example, sniffing a wired network where everybody's plugged into a switch, that can be pretty tricky. You've got to plug into that switch with everybody else or no one's going to be able to actually sniff that data. That is why hackers love wireless networks. We love them. 802.11, Bluetooth, I don't care what it is. If I can have data in transit being blasted out through the atmosphere, it is trivial for me to sniff and hopefully makes things like man in the middle easier to do. So for the Security Plus exam, make sure you're comfortable with these three different types of data. First is data at rest, where it's just sitting on a hard drive. Second, data is in use, where it's sitting in RAM and programs are accessing it. And third is data in transit, where it's zipping around on wired or wireless networks, so just waiting for us to be able to sniff it. You're going to see those on the Security Plus.